Hello, and welcome. Tonight, we're stepping into the quieter corners of history. Those small, curious details of human life that rarely find their way into grand documentaries or fast-moving history lessons. Our focus will be on beauty, but not the kind we see in glossy magazines or fashion runways. No, tonight we will explore the strange, the unusual, and the sometimes puzzling ways people have tried to enhance their appearance over the centuries and across cultures. As you settle in, I'd love for you to share something in the comments. Tell me, where in the world are you watching from? And what time is it for you right now? Perhaps it is late and you are lying in bed with the lights low, letting your eyes grow heavier with every passing minute. Or maybe it is early and you are enjoying your first quiet coffee, letting this gentle journey set the tone for the day ahead. Wherever you are, whenever you are, thank you for choosing to spend your time here. Let's begin. Our first stop takes us to the banks of the Nile. The year is somewhere around 1400 BCE. The sun is beginning to lower in the sky, casting a golden glow across the river. The air is warm but soft, carrying with it the faint scent of lotus flowers. In the distance, you can hear the soft hum of life in the ancient city of Thebes, merchants calling out their wares in the marketplace, donkeys' hooves clicking over dusty streets, the sound of papyrus sheets fluttering in a scribe's hands. Evening is approaching, and in one of the wealthier households, a woman is preparing for a gathering. She stands in a room where the walls are painted with delicate scenes, flowers, hunting scenes, offerings to the gods. A servant is arranging her hair, but instead of simply styling it, they place something on top of her head. A small, pale, cone-shaped object. It is made of perfumed wax, a mixture of oils, resins, and scented animal fat, carefully shaped and stored in cool jars until needed. The cone is placed atop the hair or wig, and as the evening progresses and the warmth of the night settles in, the wax will slowly melt, releasing its fragrance. The scent is not overpowering. It is soft floral, with notes of blue lotus and frankincense. As she moves through the gathering, speaking with guests and sipping from a delicate cup of beer sweetened with dates, the perfume drifts in the air around her, a constant, invisible accessory. In scenes painted on the walls of tombs, we can see this clearly. Elegant men and women, all with small white or amber-colored cones resting atop their heads. For many years, historians debated whether these cones were purely symbolic in art, but archaeological finds have confirmed that such cones truly existed. Imagine sitting in a dimly lit courtyard, the night air just cool enough to be comfortable, with oil lamps flickering on low tables. Around you, people laugh quietly, share stories, and music plays. The strumming of a lute-like instrument called the nefer, accompanied by the soft rattle of a sistrum. Every so often, you catch the faint scent of your neighbor's perfume cone, a reminder of this subtle art of personal presentation. In a world without modern deodorants, air fresheners, or perfumes in bottles, this was one of the most effective ways to smell pleasant throughout an evening. It also had a touch of luxury. The ingredients were not cheap, and the skill required to make a perfect cone was reserved for those with wealth. The wigs themselves, often worn beneath the cones, were an art form of their own. Crafted from human hair or plant fibers, they were styled into intricate braids and curls. Wigs allowed the wealthy to appear well-groomed in the intense Egyptian heat, where keeping one's real hair very short was often more comfortable. Over time, this combination of wig and perfume cone became a symbol of refinement, not only of beauty, but also of social status. To wear such a cone was to say, I am someone who has the time, the wealth, and the means to care for appearances. The heat would soften the cone slowly, and by the end of the night, much of it would have melted into the wig, leaving it delicately scented for days afterward. It was a temporary beauty, one meant to be enjoyed in the moment, a fragrance shared with those close enough to appreciate it. When we imagine ancient Egypt, we often think of grand monuments, temples, statues, pyramids that touch the sky. But here, in this quiet custom of perfume cones, we see something smaller, more intimate, and deeply human. A desire to be seen, to be admired, and to surround oneself, quite literally, with an aura of beauty. Our journey takes us forward, from the banks of the Nile, across the Mediterranean, and into the bustling heart of the Roman Empire. It is the 1st century CE. Rome hums with life, the sound of sandals striking marble pavements, of merchants calling out their wares in the busy forum, of chariots rattling over cobbled streets. Beneath the tall, columned porticos, citizens walk in the shade, their white togas and tunics glowing under the bright Italian sun. For Roman women of status, beauty is as much a performance as it is a possession. And in this age, one of the most coveted features is skin as pale as polished ivory. A pale complexion tells the world that you are untouched by the sun, that you do not toil outdoors. It speaks of wealth, of leisure, of belonging to a class apart. To achieve it, many women and some men turn to cherusa, a white pigment made from finely ground lead carbonate. The preparation is elaborate. Lead strips are soaked in vinegar, producing a white crust that is scraped away, dried, and ground to a fine powder. This powder is then mixed with water or oil and smoothed over the face, neck, and sometimes even the arms. The result is an almost porcelain glow, soft, uniform, and striking under lamplight. But what no one fully understands, or perhaps chooses not to think about, is that this beauty comes at a cost. Lead is toxic. Over time, it can bring headaches, fatigue, and a strange pallor that paradoxically makes the wearer even more dependent on the makeup to restore their complexion. It damages the skin, leaving it blotchy and dull beneath the flawless white mask. Still, the fashion persists. Roman poets write admiring verses about fair-skinned beauties, likening them to marble statues. Cosmetic recipes circulate among the wealthy, some adding crushed pearls for shimmer, others blending in saffron for a faint golden undertone. Imagine a Roman lady at her dressing table, her hair piled high in elaborate curls, secured with pins of bone and bronze. A small bronze mirror before her, polished until it reflects her image in a soft, warped glow. Beside her, little pots of cherusa, rouge made from red ochre, and dark powder for her brows. A servant dips a slender spatula into the white paste, applying it in slow, careful strokes. Layer after layer, her skin is transformed from the natural flush of life into the cold, serene perfection that society demands. This is beauty that comes with ritual and risk. And yet, in a world where appearances can shape your fortune, such dangers are often quietly accepted. Our journey now carries us far from the marble streets of Rome, across seas and centuries, to the refined, poetic world of Japan's Heian era, a time when beauty, elegance, and courtly manners shaped every detail of life. It is the 10th century. The imperial court in Kyoto is the center of culture and sophistication. The noble women here live in a world of poetry and moonlight, of whispered romances behind painted screens, of layers upon layers of silk robes in delicate seasonal colors. And among the many beauty practices that define this age, one stands out to our modern eyes as unusual, even startling. It is called ohaguro, the deliberate blackening of one's teeth. To Heian nobles, the look of shining, lacquer black teeth was a sign of refinement, maturity, and grace. Far from the Western ideal of white teeth, in Japan of this era, white teeth were often associated with animals or with unpolished rustic life. Blackened teeth, on the other hand, gave the smile a sense of mystery and elegance, like a lacquered box holding untold secrets. The process of ohaguro was not a quick one. A mixture was prepared, usually made from iron filings soaked in tea or vinegar, sometimes with added herbs for aroma. This liquid, when applied regularly, would darken the enamel to a deep, glossy black. The application was a daily ritual for women of the court, done in the quiet hours of the morning, before the day's social calls and poetry contests began. Imagine the scene. A noble woman sits upon a woven tatami mat before a small lacquered stand. Beside her rests a shallow dish of the dark liquid, its surface glistening in the pale light filtering through the shoshi screens. She dips a fine brush into the mixture, carefully coating each tooth with slow, deliberate strokes. When she smiles into her polished bronze mirror, her reflection gazes back with the inky gleam that marks her place among the cultured elite. The effect was striking, especially when framed by the white powder worn on the face. The contrast between pale skin and dark teeth was considered irresistibly beautiful, almost otherworldly. Over time, ohaguro also took on deeper cultural meaning. It became a sign of marital status. Married women blackened their teeth as a mark of devotion and propriety. It even spread beyond the aristocracy, with samurai families adopting the custom in later centuries. To modern eyes, it may seem strange, but to the women and men of Heian Japan, blackened teeth were simply one more thread in the intricate tapestry of beauty, fashion, and meaning that defined their world. From the soft light of Heian Japan, we now drift across continents and centuries, to Renaissance England, where the court of Elizabeth I flourished in a blaze of music, poetry, and theatrical splendor. This was a time of elaborate fashions, stiff ruffs, jewel-encrusted gowns, and heavy brocades. But among these details of dress, there was one physical feature especially admired, one that might surprise us today: the high elongated forehead. To the Elizabethans, a lofty forehead was not simply a quirk of appearance. It symbolized intelligence, refinement, and aristocratic bearing. A high brow suggested a mind elevated above earthly concerns, suitable for a courtier skilled in poetry, diplomacy, and wit. And so, women of the English Renaissance often took great pains to enlarge the appearance of their foreheads, even when nature had not provided. The practice of forehead fashion, the methods were unusual and at times uncomfortable. One common practice was the deliberate plucking or even shaving of the hairline. Women would pull their hair back and then carefully remove the fine baby hairs along their temples and brow, inch by inch. This created the illusion of a broad, unbroken expanse of skin rising high above the eyes. Eyebrows, too, were often thinned or plucked into barely visible lines, so that nothing would distract from the sweep of the forehead. Some even resorted to chemical pastes made of vinegar or walnut shells, which could thin the hair more drastically. The goal was not natural softness, but clear, sculpted space. We can imagine the ritual: a lady seated in her chamber before a polished-looking glass, her maid carefully working along the hairline, pulling up the fine strands with steady hands as the lady sips from a silver goblet of spiced wine. Little by little, her face is transformed, her forehead broadening, her features altered to suit the fashion of the court. The Queen's influence at the heart of this trend stood Queen Elizabeth I herself. Her portraits reveal a woman with a dramatically high forehead, framed by bright auburn hair, drawn back beneath jeweled headpieces. Whether or not her own hairline was naturally so pronounced, her image set the standard. As sovereign, she was the model of elegance. And so her courtiers followed, eager to reflect the Queen's ideals in their own faces. The association between high foreheads and intellect was particularly powerful in Elizabeth's reign. The Queen was known for her learning. She spoke several languages, read the classics, and commanded the stage with her speeches. Thus, a broad forehead suggested not only beauty but wisdom. It is worth remembering that in an age before widespread literacy, physical symbols carried great weight. A noble woman's forehead was, in a sense, a signboard of her cultivated mind, whether or not her education truly matched the appearance. Cosmetics and enhancement cosmetics also played a role. To emphasize the forehead, women often applied layers of pale face paint, a mixture of lead and vinegar called ceruse. This white mask smoothed the skin and erased imperfections, while also exaggerating the span of the brow. The effect, when paired with the narrow eyebrows and receding hairline, was striking. A pale, luminous forehead rising like a stage curtain above the eyes, yet the practice was not without its dangers. Ceruse, as we now know, was toxic. Prolonged use could cause hair loss, skin damage, and illness, and yet fashion demanded its sacrifice. The symbolism of the brow, to modern eyes, these foreheads might appear unusual, even unsettling, but for the Elizabethans, the symbolism was clear. A high brow was linked to nobility, intellect, and virtue. The more expansive the forehead, the more refined the woman was believed to be. Poets even praised this feature in verse, comparing foreheads to broad plains or gleaming marble. In Shakespeare's plays, references to the fair brow are often compliments to beauty and grace. Thus, what began as a peculiar fashion detail became a deeply meaningful sign of identity, intellect, and status. A quiet reflection. As we picture these women of the Renaissance, it is worth pausing to reflect. Beauty is never just about appearance. It is about meaning, about what a culture values and how it encodes those values onto the human body. The high foreheads of Elizabethan England remind us that beauty can be shaped by ideas of intelligence and power, just as much as by physical attraction. And while fashions may change, the longing to align one's body with society's ideals remains a constant thread through history. We now drift from the candlelit halls of Renaissance England to the bustling streets and drawing rooms of Europe in the 17th through 19th centuries. Here, a new standard of beauty emerged, one not focused on the forehead or hair, but on the body itself. It was the age of the corset. For nearly 300 years, this garment shaped not only the waistlines of women, but also the very idea of what was considered elegant, desirable, and respectable. The corset's legacy is complex. It was seen as both a tool of discipline and refinement, and as an object of restriction and even pain. Yet it is impossible to tell the story of historical beauty without tracing the rise and fall of the wasp waist. The birth of the corset, the origins of the corset stretch back to the 16th century, where it first appeared as stays. These were stiffened undergarments, reinforced with whalebone or reeds, designed to flatten the torso and give the upper body a rigid, conical shape. At first, the emphasis was less on narrowing the waist and more on creating a smooth canvas for the elaborate gowns of the Renaissance and Baroque courts. A noblewoman in Spain or France might wear stays laced tightly at the back. Her gown's bodice fitted snugly over the rigid underlayer. But as fashion evolved, so too did the corset's role. By the 18th century, the idea of the feminine silhouette was changing. The waist, narrow, cinched, and distinct from the hips, became the prized ideal. The rise of the wasp waist in the 19th century. Particularly during the Victorian era, the corset reached its most iconic form. Women sought the so-called wasp waist, a sharply narrowed midsection that contrasted dramatically with fuller skirts and crinolines. To achieve this, corsets were constructed with strong whalebone, steel, or tightly stitched cording. The laces were pulled ever tighter, compressing the body into the desired form. The effect was dramatic. The waist appeared impossibly slender, the bust and hips accentuated. The figure transformed into the hourglass silhouette that became the hallmark of feminine beauty. But this transformation came at a cost. The price of beauty medical journals of the Victorian age described the potential effects of extreme tight-lacing. The ribs could become deformed, the diaphragm compressed, the stomach and liver displaced. Breathing was shallow, fainting was common, and long-term damage was not unheard of. And yet, despite these risks, the corset remained a fixture of everyday life for women of the middle and upper classes. It was worn not only at balls and in portraits, but during ordinary daily routines, walking in the garden, playing the piano, or hosting afternoon tea. The corset became a symbol of discipline over the body, and by extension, discipline over behavior. A woman with a straight back and a narrow waist was thought to embody self-control, modesty, and refinement. Fashion versus reality. It is important, however, to pause and separate myth from reality. Not every woman practiced extreme tightlacing. Many corsets were worn more loosely, serving primarily as supportive garments, much like modern shapewear or posture braces. For working-class women, corsets could be practical, providing support during long hours of labor. They might be sturdier, less restrictive, and far less extreme than those worn at court or in fashion plates. But in art, literature, and high society, the image of the impossibly small waist persisted. Caricatures mocked the fainting lady who could barely breathe. Fashion magazines praised the elegance of the hourglass figure. Between the two, reality was often somewhere in the middle. The cultural symbolism of the corset beyond its physical function, the corset carried deep symbolic meaning. It represented control, both social and personal. To be laced into a corset was to be bound by the expectations of society. But it was also, paradoxically, a source of power. A woman in a tightly laced corset commanded attention. Her figure was unmistakably shaped by artifice, but that very artifice was admired. She displayed her discipline, her fashionability, and her status. In many ways, the corset embodied the dual nature of beauty standards, restrictive and liberating, painful and empowering, all at once. The decline of the corset by the early 20th century, changing attitudes began to challenge the corset's dominance. The rise of women's rights, greater participation in sports, and new ideals of health and freedom pushed against the rigid structures of Victorian fashion. Designers like Paul Poiret began to champion dresses that flowed freely, without stays or laces. The flapper fashions of the 1920s replaced the hourglass with a straight, boyish silhouette. Though corsets never vanished entirely, they survived in lingerie and later in high fashion. Their role as daily necessities faded. Yet their image remains powerful, often revived in film, theater, and costume. The corset continues to symbolize an era when beauty and restriction were stitched tightly together. A moment of reflection as we pause here. Let us consider. What does it mean when beauty demands constraint? Why do societies so often ask bodies, particular women's bodies, to reshape themselves in pursuit of an ideal? The story of the corset reminds us that beauty is never neutral. It is shaped by power, by class, by gender roles. And though fashions may fade, the questions they raise linger long after. We now travel east to China. The dynasties shift like seasons, but the customs of beauty often endure for centuries. Here, among mist-covered mountains and sprawling cities threaded with canals, one of the most unusual and haunting practices of adornment emerges: foot binding. To understand its place in Chinese society, we must first understand the ideal it represented. In the Tang and Song dynasties, women's beauty was often described in terms of delicacy, refinement, and grace. And in time, nothing captured these ideals more than the so-called lotus foot, a foot so small that it seemed almost like a flower in bloom. The process began in childhood. Girls as young as 5 or 6 would sit before their mothers or elder women of the household. Their tiny feet were first bathed in warm water, sometimes infused with herbs to soften the skin. The toenails were trimmed short to prevent infection. Then the binding began. The 4 smaller toes were bent under the sole, pressed down until they almost touched the heel. Long strips of cloth, sometimes silk, were wound tightly around, pulling the arch upward until the foot took on a sharp crescent shape. The bindings were drawn tighter each day, and the child was encouraged, or forced, to walk, so the bones would break and reset in the desired form. Over years, the foot shrank into a rigid shape about 3 inches long. These were called golden lotus feet, the most prized of all. The appearance of such feet was hidden, almost always covered by embroidered slippers of silk. Yet the way a woman walked revealed the binding. Her steps became short, swaying, almost gliding. For many men of the time, this way of moving was thought graceful, even alluring. The bound foot itself was rarely shown. Instead, it was the suggestion of fragility and the subtle rhythm of steps that spoke of refinement. But as with many beauty standards, the cost was extraordinary. Pain was constant. The bones warped, the skin often broke into sores, and infection was a constant risk. Some women lost toes, some became lame for life, and yet to refuse binding was often to refuse marriage, and with it, social security. To us today, the practice seems harsh, almost unimaginable. But in its time, it was woven deeply into the fabric of society, lasting for nearly 1,000 years. Mothers bound their daughters' feet not out of cruelty, but out of hope that they might marry well, rise in status, and be secure in a world that offered few choices to women. Imagine an early morning in a quiet courtyard. A girl sits beneath a pomegranate tree, her feet newly bound, her eyes watering from the pain. Her mother kneels beside her, tightening the cloth with practiced hands. Around them, the air smells faintly of jasmine. The sun rises gently over tiled rooftops, and in the stillness, one hears the faint shuffle of her altered steps on stone. It is a scene of beauty, of tenderness, and of sorrow. The lotus feet, for all their cultural symbolism, carried both elegance and suffering in equal measure. Imagine yourself walking into a candlelit salon in Paris, sometime around the year 1750. The room is warm with the glow of dozens of wax candles, their soft flames flickering against gilded mirrors and painted walls. Gentle music drifts from a harpsichord in the corner, mingling with the quiet laughter of men and women engaged in conversation. At first glance, you might notice the silken gowns, the powdered wigs, and the layers of lace and ribbons. But if you look more closely at the faces of the women, and sometimes the men too, you will see small, perfectly shaped patches of black velvet or silk, carefully placed on the skin, a circle on the cheek, a crescent near the eye, a tiny star close to the lips. These were called mouches, or beauty patches, and in the 18th century, they were not merely fashion. They were language. The practice of wearing beauty patches began earlier in the 16th century, but it reached its height in the 17th and 18th centuries. Originally, patches were used to cover blemishes, smallpox scars, or imperfections left by illness. At a time when cosmetics were heavy and unreliable, a simple piece of black silk offered a neat disguise. But very quickly, what began as concealment transformed into style. The sharp contrast between pale powdered skin and the deep black of a silk patch was considered striking and elegant. Soon, patches became deliberately decorative, crafted in many shapes: circles, ovals, crescent moons, stars, and even tiny hearts. They were sold in small decorative boxes, kept with cosmetics and powders, and applied with adhesive gum or wax. To wear one was to announce one's refinement. To wear several was to make a statement. Over time, the placement of these beauty patches developed into a subtle form of coded communication. Each location on the face carried a meaning, understood by fashionable society. A patch near the corner of the mouth was called la coquette, and it suggested flirtation. A patch on the cheek was la galante, implying playfulness or gallantry. Near the eye was la passione, a bold declaration of love or desire. On the forehead was la majestueuse, meant to inspire respect and dignity. To wear one patch could be coy. To wear several in different places was to craft a whole message. Women could, with nothing more than silk and gum, suggest whether they were reserved, flirtatious, romantic, or aloof. Imagine how quietly thrilling this must have been. A silent language, known to those in the room, written not with ink but with velvet. At the height of their popularity, patches became so common that some critics claimed they were being abused. Satirical prints mocked women who wore so many patches that their faces looked like starry skies. In some circles, patches became exaggerated in size, covering half a cheek or taking the shape of elaborate motifs, a ship, a fan, or even a political symbol. In England, during elections, women might wear patches in the shape of a Tory or Whig emblem, making their political leanings visible with every smile. Still, at their best, patches retained an air of elegance and delicacy. To apply them with precision was almost like painting, an art of self-presentation. In the ritual of getting dressed each day, applying beauty patches was one of the final flourishes. After powdering the hair, painting the face with rouge and white, and selecting jewels and ribbons, the placement of a patch completed the performance. It was often done before a mirror, slowly and with great care. Some women asked friends or attendants for advice. Should it be placed higher, nearer the lip, or closer to the cheek? Each choice altered the impression it gave. This ritual itself could be meditative, a small act repeated day after day, shaping how one was perceived by the world. By the end of the 18th century, the beauty patch began to fade. Styles were shifting toward naturalism. Heavy powders, towering wigs, and velvet patches no longer suited the new taste for simplicity and classical restraint. The French Revolution also played its part. Elaborate fashion became politically dangerous. Luxury was associated with excess and privilege. The coated beauty patch, once a symbol of flirtation and elegance, now felt like a relic of the old world. And so, quietly, the patch disappeared. What had once been a universal fashion dwindled into a memory, preserved in portraits and satire. Yet there is something charming, almost whimsical, about this forgotten tradition, that such a tiny object, barely larger than a fingertip, could carry so much meaning and offer so much power in the way one presented oneself to the world. When we look at these portraits from centuries past, powdered faces, calm gazes, and a single black patch on the skin, we are reminded that beauty has always been more than appearance. It has been performance, ritual, and communication. The beauty patch was not only decoration, it was a kind of poetry written on the face. When we think about beauty, eyebrows may not be the first feature that comes to mind. Yet across history, they have held surprising importance. Thin or thick, shaved or painted, joined together or removed entirely, the fashions of eyebrows have shifted as dramatically as any other form of beauty. And so let us wander through the centuries, tracing the rise and fall of these delicate lines above the eyes. In ancient Egypt, beauty and ritual were intertwined. Both men and women often darkened their eyebrows with kohl, the same cosmetic used to outline the eyes. Eyebrows were shaped, extended, and carefully defined. But there was also ritual in their removal. When a household cat died, Egyptians sometimes shaved off their eyebrows entirely, a visible sign of mourning. A fashion statement became a language of grief. Among the Greeks and Romans, thick, dark eyebrows were admired, especially when they seemed to meet in the middle. The unibrow, far from being unfashionable, was celebrated as a mark of intelligence and beauty. Women who were not naturally blessed with such brows sometimes used powders, soot, or even false additions made of goat hair to fill the gap. Some painted the bridge of the nose to create the illusion of a continuous line. What we might call unusual today was then considered the height of refinement. By the Middle Ages, fashions shifted in a more extreme direction. To emphasize the high, smooth forehead, which was thought elegant and spiritual, Many women plucked or shaved away their eyebrows completely. Portraits from the 14th and 15th centuries often show women with bare brows, their faces appearing serene and almost otherworldly. Removing the eyebrows was not simply cosmetic. It was a statement of devotion to ideals of purity, chastity, and refinement. The absence of hair became a kind of beauty in itself. During the Renaissance, eyebrows returned, but with restraint. Women often kept them thin and arched, carefully plucked to create a subtle frame for the face. The focus was still on the forehead. A high, unbroken expanse of skin remained fashionable, but brows were allowed to exist again as delicate, understated accents. Sometimes they were lightly darkened with soot or colored powder. At other times, they were almost invisible, soft whispers above the eyes. In the 1700s, another unusual fashion emerged. Some women, dissatisfied with their natural brows, wore artificial ones made of mouse fur. These tiny patches of fur were glued above the eyes, shaped into perfect arches. While they may sound strange to us now, at the time they were a practical solution for those who had lost hair due to illness, cosmetics, or the overuse of depilatory creams. Yet they also became an object of satire, mocked in prints and poems as symbols of vanity. By the 1800s, ideals shifted once again. Eyebrows were expected to be soft, natural, and modest. Heavy makeup was frowned upon, associated with actresses or courtesans. Women were encouraged to have gentle, well-shaped brows that did not dominate the face. Manuals of etiquette suggested that the most beautiful eyebrow was one that seemed untouched, even if, behind closed doors, it had been carefully groomed. In the 20th century, eyebrow fashion became more visible and extreme once again. In the 1920s, silent film stars popularized the pencil-thin brow. Women shaved or plucked away their natural brows and replaced them with drawn lines, long and arched, often extending far beyond the natural brow bone. These brows were dramatic, expressive, and cinematic, designed to exaggerate emotion on screen. They gave the face a melancholy, wistful quality, perfectly suited to the glamour of the era. After the thin brows of the 1920s and 30s, the mid-20th century saw a swing in the opposite direction. Icons like Audrey Hepburn and Elizabeth Taylor brought back the thick, natural brow, full and arched, emphasizing strength and elegance. By the 1960s, brows became more sculpted again, defined but bold, matching the sharper makeup and fashion of the era. In more recent history, eyebrows have continued their cycle of extremes. The 1990s revived ultra-thin brows, plucked into delicate arcs. In the 2010s, thick, bushy brows returned, celebrated on fashion runways and social media. And today, in the 21st century, trends move faster than ever. Bleached brows, laminated brows, glittered brows. Each carries its own meaning, its own experiment and identity. When we trace this long history, we see that eyebrows are more than hair above the eyes. They are markers of culture, of status, of ideals. To shave them, to paint them, to thicken or remove them, each act has been part of a larger conversation about beauty and self-presentation. The eyebrows tell us that beauty has never been fixed. It shifts, it transforms, it reinvents itself, even in the smallest of details. And in every age, the simple line of an eyebrow has carried the weight of fashion, identity, and meaning. The Victorian age is often remembered for its elegance, lace dresses, candlelit parlors, and an obsession with refinement. But behind the velvet curtains of that era lay something darker. For beauty in the 19th century, danger was never far away. And among the most unsettling of all beauty practices was the use of arsenic, a poison disguised as a cosmetic. In Victorian society, pale skin was the standard of beauty. It was not just fashionable, it was moralized. A clear white complexion was seen as a sign of purity, gentility, and even virtue. To be pale meant that one did not labor outdoors in the sun. It meant wealth, leisure, and delicacy. But achieving that pallor was not easy for everyone. And so, women turned to powders, tonics, and even pills, many laced with arsenic. Arsenic was already known to be poisonous. Yet, in small doses, some believed it could enhance beauty. Lotions and powders were sold with promises that they would clear the complexion or remove freckles. Advertisements claimed they could smooth the skin, brighten the eyes, and even make the face appear more youthful. One such product, Fowler's Solution, was a diluted arsenic tonic, originally intended as a medicine. It was marketed for treating skin conditions, but soon, women began to use it as a beauty aid, sipping it daily in the hope of perfecting their looks. Perhaps most infamous of all were the so-called arsenic complexion wafers. These were small tablets sold openly, even advertised in newspapers. They promised a fair, fresh appearance, and they were marketed as safe, so long as one followed the directions. The wafers, in truth, contained enough arsenic to do harm over time. Yet women consumed them faithfully, convinced they were unlocking the secret to eternal youth. The effects of arsenic use were not glamorous. In reality, they were devastating. The skin might first appear clearer, but prolonged use caused vomiting, diarrhea, and hair loss. Skin could take on a waxy or sallow hue. Fingernails developed white lines, a telltale sign of poisoning. In higher doses, arsenic could damage the heart, destroy the nervous system, and eventually prove fatal. But the harm was often hidden. Many women quietly endured the side effects, never connecting their illness to the powders and pills they had trusted. Arsenic was not confined to cosmetics. It was present throughout Victorian households, in green dyes for wallpapers and candles, even in children's toys. The famous Scheele's green pigment, a vibrant emerald shade, was laced with arsenic. Sitting in a richly decorated Victorian parlor meant slowly breathing in poison. And yet, knowing this, some still willingly ingested arsenic wafers for beauty's sake. It reveals just how powerful ideals of beauty can be, enough to outweigh fear, enough to risk one's health. By the late 19th century, the dangers of arsenic became harder to ignore. Medical reports began linking its use to illness and death. Gradually, safer alternatives emerged. Face powders shifted toward rice and zinc bases. Tonics lost their more lethal ingredients. But the shadow of arsenic lingered as a reminder of the lengths to which society had gone for a pale, flawless complexion. The story of arsenic and beauty is not only about poison. It is about obsession with perfection, with status, with ideals that demanded sacrifice. When we look back, it seems unthinkable that anyone would swallow poison for the sake of a clearer face. And yet, in every age, beauty has carried its own risks. Today, our cosmetics may be safer, but the story of Victorian arsenic reminds us to question how far we are willing to go and what price we are willing to pay in the pursuit of beauty. Hair has always been more than just hair. Across time and cultures, it has carried meaning of status, of spirituality, of identity. Hairstyles have been symbols of power, of wealth, of resistance, and of beauty. Let us take a quiet journey through some of history's most striking hairstyles and what they reveal about the people who wore them. In ancient Egypt, hair was not simply groomed, it was designed. Wealthy Egyptians often shaved their heads to stay cool in the desert heat. In place of natural hair, they wore wigs of human hair, wool, or plant fibers. These wigs were not just fashion, they were status symbols. The more elaborate the wig, the higher one's rank. Braids, beads, and gold ornaments shimmered in the sunlight, reflecting both beauty and wealth. For Egyptians, hair was also tied to cleanliness. Priests shaved their heads completely, while royalty donned heavy, ornate wigs. Cleopatra herself is often depicted with thick braids, adorned with jewels. In the classical world, hair was art. Greek women favored simple, wavy styles. often tied back in buns with ribbons or diadems. A woman's hair was seen as her crowning glory, a reflection of both her beauty and her virtue. The Romans, however, took hairstyles to new heights, literally. Wealthy Roman women wore towering, elaborate hairstyles. Some were built with pads and wires, allowing curls to rise high above the head. Slaves were tasked with hours of braiding, curling, and pinning. These hairstyles proclaimed status just as loudly as fine clothing. In the Middle Ages, hair became bound up with ideas of modesty. Women often wore their hair long, but it was usually covered with veils or wimples. To reveal loose hair in public could be seen as improper or even scandalous. Yet, on special occasions such as weddings, hair was let down to symbolize purity and beauty. Braids wound with ribbons were a popular way to keep hair both contained and elegant. The Renaissance brought hair back into the spotlight. Italian noblewomen bleached their hair until it turned a golden blonde, a color seen as divine. They plucked their hairlines to create high, rounded foreheads, an unusual look to modern eyes, but one that was celebrated as a mark of beauty. Intricate braids coiled with pearls, nets, and ribbons framed painted faces. Hair was no longer hidden, it was showcased, elevated into an art form. Few hairstyles are as unforgettable as those of 17th and 18th century Europe. The courts of Louis XIV and Marie Antoinette made towering powdered wigs the height of fashion. These wigs could rise over a foot tall, decorated with feathers, jewels, and sometimes even miniature ships or gardens. They were heavy, expensive, and required hours of preparation. But they were also powerful statements, a crown of fashion for the elite, yet these wigs were not without drawbacks. They attracted lice, they were difficult to clean, and they sometimes even caught fire from nearby candles. Still, their grandeur remains a striking reminder of the theatricality of fashion. Hairstyles were not only about status, they were also about identity. In many African cultures, intricate braiding styles have carried deep meaning for centuries. They could signify age, marital status, clan, or community. Braids were also a form of storytelling, a way to carry heritage visibly and proudly. Among the samurai of Japan, men shaved the tops of their heads and tied the rest of their hair in a top knot, a style known as the chanmage, which marked their warrior status. In Native American cultures, hairstyles were often symbolic too, from long braids to shaved heads. Each style reflected tradition, spirituality, and personal meaning. Sometimes the pursuit of beauty has led to practices that seem unthinkable today. One of the strangest treatments in history is the use of bird droppings. Yes, you heard that correctly, as a cosmetic. In Japan, as early as the Heian period 794-1185, noblewomen and performers were known to use powdered nightingale droppings, known as ugisu no fan, in their skincare. At first, this might sound unpleasant, but there was a reason behind it. Nightingale droppings contain natural enzymes and guanine, a substance that reflects light and gives skin a bright appearance. Geisha and kabuki actors, who wore heavy white makeup made of rice powder and sometimes toxic lead-based ingredients, used these treatments to cleanse and brighten their skin. Mixed with rice bran and water, the droppings created a paste that was applied as a mask. The result was said to be smooth, luminous skin. Surprisingly, this practice never completely disappeared. Even today, luxury spas in Japan, and even in parts of the West, offer the geisha facial, which uses sanitized nightingale droppings as a luxury treatment. What was once a secret of the stage in the courtesan houses is now repackaged as an exotic beauty experience. When we look back at this practice, it reminds us how far people are willing to go in the pursuit of beauty. To some, the ugisu facial may seem strange, even distasteful, yet it reflects the truth that beauty is often tied not just to appearances, but to ritual, tradition, and the desire to transform oneself, no matter how unusual the method. History is full of remedies and rituals that feel very far removed from our world today. And perhaps one of the strangest and most unsettling to modern ears is the use of urine as a cosmetic. Yes, during the Renaissance in Europe, and even in earlier periods, urine was sometimes employed in beauty care, not as a joke, but in earnest. In a time before modern chemistry or dermatology, people often turned to what was readily available, guided by ancient medical texts and humoral theory. Urine was thought to contain cleansing properties. Some physicians recommended it as a mouthwash for whitening teeth. Others suggested it could smooth the skin and prevent blemishes. Women seeking a clear, pale complexion, one of the highest markers of beauty in Renaissance Europe, might use fresh or fermented urine in their routines. The logic was that since urine passed through the body filtered and distilled, it carried a sort of natural purity. To Renaissance thinkers, this purity could be harnessed. Accounts suggest that urine was sometimes mixed into beauty concoctions as a cleanser. It was also believed to have bleaching properties. Some recipes for hair lightening included soaking hair in urine and then exposing it to the sun, producing a golden or reddish tint that was highly fashionable. And for teeth, yes, it was considered effective. The ammonia in urine acted as a natural whitening agent long before anyone understood its chemical composition. The practice might seem shocking, but in a world without toothpaste, hair dye, or over-the-counter cosmetics, people often turned to what they had at hand. This was not limited to Europe. Ancient Romans also used urine for cleansing and whitening, particularly in laundry, where it served as a bleaching agent for garments. That same logic was carried into personal care. Renaissance society, drawing heavily on Roman texts, revived the practice in new ways. To them, it was not unusual, but rather resourceful, even scientific. For us today, the idea is difficult to imagine. Yet this chapter of beauty history is a reminder. What is considered luxurious and desirable in one age may strike another as unthinkable. It also shows the lengths to which people throughout history have gone to conform to the ideals of their culture, even when it meant embracing practices we would avoid at all costs today. In the quiet glow of Renaissance palaces and candlelit chambers, beauty was not only admired but carefully crafted, sometimes at great personal risk. Among the many strange and dangerous treatments that women embraced in pursuit of beauty, one of the most haunting is the use of belladonna drops, an extract of the deadly nightshade plant, to widen the pupils of the eyes. Belladonna, also known as beautiful woman in Italian, had long carried with it an air of danger and fascination. The plant itself, with its deep purple flowers and glossy black berries, was both enticing and poisonous. To apothecaries and herbalists of the Renaissance, belladonna was a plant of contradictions. It could serve as a pain reliever in careful doses, a sedative for troubled sleep, or, in larger quantities, a deadly poison. It was this very duality, its ability to transform appearance and affect the senses, that brought it into the world of beauty. A few drops of belladonna juice placed into the eyes would cause the pupils to dilate. In the dimly lit world of Renaissance interiors, a large dark pupil gave the eye a liquid, mysterious quality. Writers of the time compared these eyes to deep pools, inviting, romantic, and mesmerizing. In a culture where subtle signals of beauty carried great weight, dilated pupils became a coveted feature. They suggested passion, allure, and even nobility of spirit. But behind this beauty lay great risk. The same alkaloids in belladonna that created this doe-eyed look also disrupted vision. Women who used these drops often experienced blurred sight, sensitivity to light, or even long-term damage to their eyes. In higher doses, belladonna could lead to hallucinations, convulsions, or death. Yet, like so many dangerous beauty rituals of the past, the danger was overlooked in favor of the fleeting promise of elegance and charm. It is a sobering reminder of the pressures that women face to embody ideals that were often unnatural and sometimes lethal. Even centuries later, the image of the belladonna eyes remained powerful in art and poetry. Painters often emphasized wide, dark pupils as a sign of beauty. Poets, too, evoked the mysterious allure of eyes that seemed to hold more than mere human warmth. But the name, belladonna, tells the whole story, the intertwining of beauty and danger, allure and death. To look into such eyes may have been enchanting, but behind the gaze was a sacrifice that modern eyes can scarcely imagine. This practice reminds us that beauty, across time, has often been pursued at any cost. It also reveals how ideals shift. For today, dilated pupils are not considered a standard of beauty. Yet in Renaissance Italy, they were thought to be the height of elegance. In every age, people have sought ways to shape and perfect themselves, and in doing so, they have sometimes embraced rituals that blurred the line between beauty and harm. And so, dear listener, we come to the end of our long journey through the winding corridors of history's beauty standards. From the crushed beetles of ancient Egypt to the painful bindings of tiny feet in China, from powdered wigs towering above Georgian courts to belladonna eyes shimmering in candlelight, we have seen how the quest for beauty has always been more than skin deep. It has been a story of desire and status, of power and identity, of longing to belong, and sometimes of suffering for an ideal that can never be fully reached. As strange as these customs may feel to us today, they remind us of a truth that echoes across every age. Beauty is never fixed. What one culture calls lovely, another may find strange. What is celebrated in one century may be ridiculed in the next. Even today, we are not so different. Our own standards, filtered through screens, trends, and ideals, will one day seem just as unusual, perhaps even just as dangerous to those who look back at us. In every practice, no matter how shocking, there is a thread that binds us to the past, the human wish to transform the self, to become a little more admired, a little more accepted, a little more seen. It is a longing that speaks to our vulnerability, but also to our creativity. For even in dangerous or painful rituals, there is a kind of artistry, a belief that the body can be reshaped into a vision of beauty that lives first in the imagination. So tonight, as you drift deeper into rest, let these stories settle like whispers of another time. May they remind you that beauty has never been just about appearances. It is about meaning, belonging, and the stories we choose to tell with our bodies. And as you close your eyes, remember this: the most enduring beauty is not in dangerous rituals or fleeting fashions, but in the quiet, natural grace of being human. Before we part, I would love to hear from you. Which of these beauty practices surprised you the most? Do you think our own modern beauty standards will one day be seen as strange as corsets, lead paint, or belladonna eyes? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And as always, let me know where in the world you're watching from and what time it is as you listen. Thank you for spending this time with me. Sleep well, dream deeply, and I'll see you again in the next journey through history. Soft music fades out, leaving a calm silence.